Okay, this is actually an older presentation, but I've added a bunch of new stuff to it. I like to do that because I do a lot of talks, and I get bored of doing the same talks over and over again. So I like to change things up, and today I'm very excited to have completely new content for you guys. This one's kind of new, but what I'm going to do after this is entirely new. I rebuilt it for this event, and is there a power somewhere?
Yes, down on the bottom.
I'll figure this out. And it's actually going to be part of a bunch of new content that I'm creating that I'll put on my website eventually. But as Scott alluded to, I'm actually in the process of changing my farming. I've been doing urban farming for 8 years, and I've done a lot of research and development on my farm. One of the things that I've been really privileged to do is travel around, and I visit farms all over the world. I've been in 4 different countries extensively, toured all around the US, and I've seen the best of what there is in market gardening. And what I've been able to do over the last number of years is take the best of the things that I learned from other growers and then just mess around with them on my farm. So I've tweaked things a lot over the years. Another thing that I've been really privileged to do is I've shared my stuff with thousands of people. And that process of sharing information is a feedback loop. And a lot of the things that I've changed on my farm have been a result of comments on my YouTube channel. From me just sharing stuff and putting myself out there. And I would really encourage those of you who are starting out or would like to get to start out, who are interested in and know social media, know YouTube, is to share your stuff. Because we're in a very interesting time right now in that we have the ability to change things really quickly because we can disseminate information so fast. And that presents all kinds of opportunities. It connects us to a global community, and we're all here to talk about local food, and that's good, and we should keep food local, but information is global. And by doing that, we can find like-minded people all over the world, and we can continuously refine and improve on our techniques. And so I'm not here in any of my talks to say that I'm an expert in anything. All I've done is I've made a shitload of mistakes, and I've shared them with the world, and I've been able to refine them over time because I don't care if I screw up on camera. I don't care if I do something that was wrong one time and I come around 3 months later and say, hey, this is wrong and I should have done it this way. I do that all the time. I have around 500 videos on YouTube, and if you watch them from the beginning to the end, you'll see that lineage of change. And I think we should all do that because the internet space, especially social media, is plastered with garbage. It's plastered with just like consumerist crap. And I'm not here to sit on a pedestal and say I'm on this moral high ground, but we all kind of share common values. That's all why we're all here. So if you want to help change the world in this, get your stuff out there. Because you'll be amazed on how much of a global community you can reach out to in your little town, on your little farm, thinking that you're all alone and that there's nobody else around. Get it out there and you'll discover that there are a lot of people out there doing this stuff. And when you do that, the world looks a whole lot different. Because I got into farming because I was entirely motivated by fear. Around 2008, when the recession was starting, I was still living in Montreal. I was trying to be a professional musician, trying to make a go at it. And it's a grind. If you think farming's hard, try being a working musician. Because you won't make money, and you'll probably be hungry. You know, I thought at least if I could get into farming, I could at least feed myself, and that would have been one step in the right direction. But it's amazing how the world changes, not only when you change your mentality, but you open up, and all of a sudden the world looks different. So in 2008, I was obsessed with the world going to shit. I thought it was all going to go down. 2008, okay, recession, this is the beginning. You know, and I was probably one of those people that bought into the, I certainly was, one of those people that bought into the 2012 apocalypse. And, you know, you're going, okay, you know, I'm sitting here in Montreal, minus 40 degrees Celsius in the winter sometimes, which is minus 40 Fahrenheit. And it's cold. And we had an ice storm that happened that year that froze the city into a gridlock. Power lines collapsed, homes without heat, grocery stores, in Canada, it's probably the same in the US, we have 3-day food supply. So if the food truck stopped running, there's 3 days of food. And so that terrified me back then. And I was a total doom and gloomer, I'll admit that. I'm not at all anymore. I was so scared that everything was going to go to hell. But the thing that changed for me is, one, I started making steps in my life. So when we come to these conferences, we often talk about, what can we do? What can we do? Stop asking what we can do. Ask yourself, what can I do right now? And what's the first step? What can you do? What are you going to do? That's the question. That's what I want you guys to leave here with is, what are you going to do? Forget the we. Because if you wait around for the we, you wait around for a long time. And when I was getting into all this stuff, I was one of these people that had all kinds of opinions about how the world ought to be and what's wrong with the world. But I wasn't taking any serious steps. And I started to find like-minded people that were into this stuff, and we would talk about, yeah, let's get a piece of land, let's start a commune, let's do this, let's be back to landers. It takes forever to get that kind of stuff going on. Start now. Get your stuff in order. And it's like that old saying, if you build it, they will come. And all of a sudden the world will look so different to you, because you'll be not only satisfying your thirst to try to do something, and you'll go to sleep every night, but you'll also be amazed on how many people will show up on your doorstep, literally, going, hey, I really like what you're doing, I want to help you. And it has been an absolute path of serendipity for me this entire road, because I haven't been afraid to share and I haven't been afraid to fail. And I've had people that, when I was starting out, that came and wanted to give me money to start. They wanted to come and work for me for free. I had so many people trying to help me that I constantly had to say no. I couldn't manage it. There's too many people trying to help. So, message there is, get yourself out there. Put yourself out there. Share it. Don't be afraid. Just do it. And you'll be amazed on how the world looks so different from the crap that we hear on the news every day. The bad news, climate change, economic collapse, all this stuff. If you look back in history, it's nothing new. It's always been doom and gloom. Doom and gloom sells. Media knows that. So don't listen to all the crap. The world has actually got a lot of great things going on. There's a lot of positive things happening. There's a lot of people out there crushing it at this. They're making money at this. They're building an amazing lifestyle. They're helping their community. Things are not all bad. And that has been my process of discovery by doing this myself in my own hometown, but also traveling the world and seeing what people are doing. So I want to kind of start on a positive note that way, and we'll get into what my farm is all about. So this presentation, I've changed a little bit for this one. Normally this presentation was a very detail-orientated presentation on how to convert a plot of land into a mini farm. And I'm going to show you that near the end, but I'm going to give you a bit more background on what my farm is all about, what we're doing now, where we've been, what it looks like, and kind of push that stuff on the end a little bit. One thing about urban farms I will say that is very interesting is that you're in the marketplace as an urban farm. It's probably the greatest advantage to being an urban farm. There's many disadvantages. It's probably half and half on what the disadvantages are, what the advantages are. But certainly the biggest advantage to running an urban farm is that you have access to the marketplace because people see you. It's really that simple. You're farming in the city, people walk by and they go, hey, that's cool. I like that, where can I get your stuff? And so it's never been hard for us to sell our stuff, because we just throw ourselves out there. There's also all kinds of risks involved in that too. If you're farming in an old city, you've got soil contamination to be concerned about. You've got theft to worry about, depending on the kind of area you're in. And you've got the disadvantage of having awkward plots and not necessarily large plots. And a lot of what I've learned throughout the course of my career doing this, I've been 8 years doing this now, has been through the fact that I didn't have the ideal scenario to start with, and I just kind of had to make it work. And so a lot of the things that I'm going to share with you in this workshop and the next is what those have been and what's made us successful. And it's always an interesting way to start is with limited resources. I've done a lot of consulting for nonprofits over the years, I've consulted for big nonprofits that have foundations that dump in hundreds of thousands of dollars. But I've also consulted for a lot of just startups with very little money. And the one thing that is consistent in the nonprofits is that if you start with too much money, it often kills the operation. And the reason for that is that you're not forced to make conservative and calculated decisions. And I'm all about being frugal and all about being conservative in the way you spend money, because that makes you really value everything that you do. Some of these startups in the nonprofits, oh, let's just inject 100 grand, well, let's just decide where to spend it. Oh, we need this, we need that. You don't really think about the intention and the purpose of each thing you're spending money on. Whereas on the really shoestring budget, I started my farm on $7,000. I had to be very conservative and calculated about how I spent each of those dollars. And it made me fully understand the nuances of every purchase I was making, about the tool that I was using, or the technique, or the infrastructure that I was using. It made me think about those things. On a small farm, a thing that's really important is stacking. Stacking functions is having one thing that does many things, instead of just having a bunch of stuff, because you can get overwhelmed with stuff. And that's what's been interesting about farming this way. Because when I started, I wanted to go big. Not necessarily big with tractors and stuff, but I wanted to have acreage, and I wanted to be in the country, and I wanted to do it all. I wanted to be off the grid and all that. I wanted to grow all my own food. I wanted to sell the food. I wanted to raise animals. I wanted to do everything. And that's often where people start, because they go on the internet and they just get inundated with possibilities, which is cool. But it's limiting in the sense that if you have too many options, it's hard to pick one to start with. And I think that is really the most important thing, is pick one thing. Do that, crush it, make it good, and then go on to the next thing. So many people try to do everything off the bat, and that burns them out, because they can't really get ahead in one thing. And what I've discovered, this is with crops, with techniques, and with styles of farming, is that if there's too much going on, you're always running around trying to catch up. Whereas if you have less going on, you can fully immerse yourself in that thing, whether it's a crop, a product, a type of farming, a place. You really understand the nuances of that thing. You can learn that thing really well. This is why I tell farmers to start with like 10 crops. Don't start with 80 crops. Start with 10. And really dial those in, and then there's nothing wrong with diversifying your farm. In fact, I encourage it, but really understand each thing before you go on to the next. Because there's so many nuances. There's so many moving parts on a farm. That's why it's hard to have cookie cutter farms too, because there's so many variables in it. So I started this because I had no other options. I didn't have much money. I had a lot of debt, a lot of student debt at the time. I was 30 when I started my farm. I'm 38 now. And I had $7,000 that I saved from a season of tree planting. Tree planting was what I did for 9 years. It got me through my music career in Montreal, put me through college. And it was a great thing to do. I'm glad I did that. It's a very Canadian job. I don't know if they don't do it in the same way down in the US, but in Canada, it's very entrepreneurial in the sense you work for a company and you get paid by the tree. So go in the clear cut, and as many trees as you plant is however much you get paid. So I learned that drive then is like, what I make is what I take. And I learned to just not take breaks and just hustle all day. And in the world of business, and especially the world of farming, hard work wins. Straight up. You can be like you can be a basketball player like LeBron James, and you can be like the most talented person in the end. But guys like Steve Nash, who are short and didn't have it all, but just hustled, that wins. In the long run, that wins. So, with that, don't get hung up on the fact that you don't have as much as the next person. You don't have as much startup capital. Doesn't matter. You hustle, chances are you're going to win. And that's what it really comes down to. But there's working hard, and there's also working smart. And as you refine your business, and you want to continuously look at ways to work smart. And in my next presentation, I'm going to get into that in detail, because our farm, over the years, I haven't been interested in growing it in size and scale, but I've been interested in making it more and more lean so that it takes less and less work. Because for me, a big part of this, the biggest part of this is quality of life. Number one is quality of life. Yes, making money is good, and in my videos and in my book, I show people how to do that because I want you to make money at this, I want you to succeed. Because if you don't, then you don't have the quality of life. So you got to make a profit, you got to be able to put your kids, get your kids health care, you got to be able to afford the things that give us the American dream that we all want. And, so you got to have that profit to make your way to that. So, without further ado, I'm going to go through these slides and kind of talk about our farm. So I'm not far from you guys at all. Like, that's where I am. I'm just slightly north of you. I'm Zone 6B where I live downtown. I think in Spokane, what are you, a 7? It's a 6. So I'm the exact same climate. My daughter's doing the exact same thing right now. I'm making the exact same noises. So that's where I am. So everything I'm going to show you is totally possible here, 100%. Like I said, I've traveled to 4 different countries, and I've been all over the U.S., and this stuff can work anywhere. This stuff can work, you can get as high as this, around Prince George in British Columbia. This can work fine. I have students up there doing it. I had a guy in my last workshop in Tennessee a couple weeks ago from Alaska. He's farming up there. This stuff is possible. You from Alaska too? So you can do this stuff anywhere. And, don't get hung up on the short season. Agriculture is all about manipulating the season, right? Agriculture is all about delivering a result that nature wouldn't provide on its own. And so there's all kinds of tools and techniques out there in today's day and age that are continuously pushing the boundaries, but more and more is possible. Our farm, as it is right now, is a 1/4 acre of production. And so that means the blocks of land, greenhouses, all total up to be a 1/4 acre. So when I've got some videos out there where I show other people's farm, or people look at my farm and they go, that's not a 1/4 acre, but it's like, I'm not counting the house, dude. Because the house doesn't make money. When I talk about production, I'm talking about the production, right? I'm not talking about the house. My lot, so I own this house, and I live here. I'm fully solar powered, 12 kilowatt solar system. That is a 1/4 acre lot, but that's not a 1/4 acre production, right? So this is my neighbor's house. I bought my house from him. I also farm his backyard, and I also farm the front yard. I'll show you more pictures in detail as we go through this. So our farm is a 1/4 acre production. Actually, to be exact, it's 0.28 if you total up our production area. And I'll kind of show you detailed shots, drone shots, and all this of the farm. But this is what we're farming on. It's not a lot of land. It's a very small amount of land. And we can do $105,000 a season on our farm. That's gross. Net is about $55,000, 50% profit margin. And in the next workshop, I'm going to break those numbers down a lot further. But we can do $100,000. We've done that for the last 3 years. We're continuously finding ways to grow it without growing the farm. And I remember I did a video a couple of years ago. It's one of my more popular videos called 75,000 on 1/3 of an acre. So when I hit that was like, okay, wow, this is it. But it wasn't. It wasn't. We kept finding ways to do more. And we're continuously trying to innovate on new ways. So Scott alluded to a new farm I'm building. I am going to be changing. I'm going to keep, Green City Acres is going to stay the way it is, but I am looking at buying more land because I want to try and innovate in other sectors. I feel like we've almost maximized what's possible on the urban farm, so I'm looking at other possibilities on things that I can learn and try and keep it fresh. Big part of the reason that our farm is so profitable is that we are focused on a select group of crops. That's really what it comes down to. There's 3 types of crops primarily that we're growing: salad greens, microgreens, and radishes, or baby root vegetables like radishes, turnips, baby carrots, baby beets. Those split up to be about 50%, 25, and 25. That's what we're focused on. That's what makes money. Everything that I've done on my farm over the years is all about following the Pareto principle. If you don't know what that is, Google it. But I'll tell you, it's worth looking into because it actually explains a lot about the way the world works. The Pareto distribution is also very interesting when you look at how money flows and how, there's always a small group of people that will be extremely successful, and there's a massive group of people that will be horribly unsuccessful. This is not just a thing. People often talk about, income inequality and all that, and they say, oh, it's a thing in capitalism. It's actually not. It's actually a thing in human nature. That there's always a small minority of people that absolutely knock it out of the park. There's a few people that do okay, but the majority of people don't do well at all. And the Pareto principle is an incredible thing to understand. And what I've discovered in the process of my years of farming is that if I follow that and I apply it to every single thing I do, I continuously make more with less work. So what are the crops? In my book, I lay out a thing called the CVR, the crop value rating system, where I break down 5 categories. I'm not going to get into all now, but break down these 5 categories of what makes a crop profitable. You apply that to all the things you want to grow, you can figure out really quickly what to focus on and what to eliminate or mitigate. And that's what we've done, because I've grown 90 different types of vegetables. But it was, in my year, there was one year I had 2.5 acres and 8 staff working for me, 90 different crops. There was 10 to 15 that made 80% of the revenue of the farm. The next year, I walked out of that partnership, I abandoned 2 acres of that land, and I made more money on that half acre and worked less than I did on that entire 2 acres. So that's what it's all about, is doubling down on what's working and eliminating what isn't. And you can apply that not only to crops, you can apply that to customers, you can apply that to techniques on the farm, you can apply that to relationships, everything. And so I'm unscrupulous with it now. I go through my calendar at the end of each year, and I go through and I look at everything I did, and I 80-20 it. What was worthwhile and what wasn't. And I just continuously keep focusing on the things that are worthwhile. Our farm now, and those of you who were in the panel last night, I kind of alluded this to a bit. We predominantly sell to mainstream franchise grocery stores. I would never have imagined that I would be up here talking about local food and small farming and saying that that would be my primary market stream. It wasn't to start. Restaurants used to be our biggest revenue stream, and we started with farmers markets, and we did run a CSA for 3 years. But the world of food is changing. The demands are changing. The mainstream players are getting interested in local. They're getting interested in small scale, and the market garden is not quite mainstream, but it's getting there. And people are interested. And so this has become our main revenue stream. The great thing about the restaurant or the grocery stores is that they are zero maintenance customers. Restaurants are high maintenance customers, generally speaking. If you find a good chef who has a relatively moderate ego, and they'll buy a lot of stuff, and they'll pay on time, ride that all the way, ride that forever. Keep that relationship golden. I have 2 chefs over the 30 that I've sold to over years that are that, and they're still customers of mine. But restaurants can be a challenging marketplace because of that. That I had one year where I got screwed out of 10 grand because some people, had some drug addictions instead of spending on the restaurant, and and it's an intense environment selling to chefs too. Long story, I won't get into it. Farmers markets are awesome, and I did farmers markets for 6.5 years. I dropped it halfway through the last year. Farmers markets are awesome because it's the best place to start as a grower. You can show up with stuff. Pretty much that's it. Show up with stuff, put it on the table. There's all kinds of things you can do to do better at it. We don't have time for those today, but that's essentially it. So when you're a new grower, you can just show up. You want to sell to chefs, you got to be on time, you got to have consistent production, you got to know how to manage accounts, and you got to know how to manage relationships with people that you might not normally hang out with. So there's a lot of things there. Whereas farmers market, show up some stuff, smile, stand up, be a nice person to talk to, and you can do pretty well as long as it's a good farmers market. But we no longer do farmers markets because throughout that process of analyzing my 80-20, it was where do I put my time? I'm a new parent now too, so it's my time is extremely valuable to me. And so I don't have time to get text messages from chefs at 10:30 p.m. on a Sunday. I don't have time to take calls all the time. I need to manage my time, and so throughout my process of refining my farm, I've just gone, what's the path of least resistance? Yes, at the grocery stores I make a little bit less money, but I have no management with the customer relation, and they pay all the time, consistently. So that's worth a lot to us. So we're farming in yards. This is how we started. And again, if I started this way because this is what was available to me. I followed the path of least resistance. I followed what was available to me. I'm not here to tell you that urban farming is better, and nothing that I'm going to talk about in my workshops or any of my content is only applicable to urban. All this stuff is applicable in any type of farm, particularly any type of market garden. So guys like myself and Jean-Martin Fortier or Ben Hartman, you know, people who have written books about this, Elliot Coleman, the guru, the master of it all, who we've all based our content off, we're all following the standard. The standard in market gardening now is a 30-inch wide bed with, you know, your walkway will vary. And we're following, using standards. We're using standard units of production. This is the front yard of my house. People go, don't you have... Aren't people stealing stuff out of your front yard? It's like, what are you going to do? Come and cut some mustard greens? What are you going to steal? You're going to go and cut some spinach? Okay, go nuts. In my 8 years of doing this, I've never noticed anybody stealing anything significant. But that's why I've got this raspberry bush here. I call that a decoy crop. And so I've got this one neighbor, he's hilarious. I talked to him a few times, the Russian guy, doesn't speak much English. And he pretty much has eaten like 80% of that bush. And I've told him many times, like, dude, it's okay. Like, I'm not, but he's always like there, kind of. Thinks he's like, it's like, dude, it's there for you. And like, go nuts. Just leave my greens alone. But in 8 years of doing this, I've never had problems with vandalism. You know, one thing that's really cool about farming, brought the farm to the people, and they get excited about it. You know, one thing that's great about the market garden too is that we got straight beds. It looks like agriculture. You know, in the greater umbrella of organic farming and permaculture, all this, some stuff doesn't look like farming. It looks like weeds with spirals of hippie designs, you know. And that stuff might be cool, but people don't get it. People get that because it looks like farming. It looks like ag. Straight lines, right? It looks like there's production. And so I find that is a better vehicle to engage the general public in the conversation about food. I don't need to convince anybody about the importance of local food. When they see that, they go, yeah, I get it. There's some production happening there. That makes sense. So it's a great talking point, because I don't have to explain anything nuanced about, yeah, I've got this herb spiral thing, it's got all these rocks, and then I've got this plant guild with the keyhole garden, and I know there's weeds everywhere, but the weeds actually play an important part. It's like, I don't have to go down a rabbit hole of trying to convince them of anything. They see the rows, they see the crops they get. Simple. This is our home base in the wintertime. We farm year-round. We use different types of greenhouses. This is a passive solar or hybrid passive solar greenhouse. It's got a geothermal climate battery underneath it, so it's warm year-round. This is a hot house where we can do lettuce. This is lettuce last Christmas. The greenhouse looks like this right now as well. So we can really push the season. This is our nursery, and this nursery is awesome. Like, I built this in the city. I don't know if our bureaucrat friends are still here, but I didn't get a permit for this. Just did it. I'm all about it's better to ask forgiveness than to ask permission.
Yes.
And if you know what? If you know your neighbors, and you give them veggies every now and then, and you know, I take some of my neighbors' potted plants that they leave outside. I let them put them in my greenhouse in the winter. They love me. So I didn't have to ask permission for anything. I just did it, and nobody cares. At one point, I might get some city guy that's like, hey, you didn't get a permit for that. And I actually looked into, I always like to analyze the costs, the risks of doing things. And I basically assessed that it's cheaper to pay the ticket and fine than it was to go to city council and ask for permission. Because I have to get a zoning change and the text amendment, and it's just like, you got to go and appeal, and it would cost me tons of time and thousands of dollars. Hey, I'll pay the ticket, $600, and you pay the permit. Okay, might at the end cost me $900. Done. But in the meantime, I've got a greenhouse that grows microgreens all year. And that, to be honest, that's been my MO since I started doing this. It's another urban lot. This is the only lot that we have on the farm that's entirely vacant and there's no house on it. It's just an urban lot that I lease out. How are we doing for time?
You're good.
When do we have to finish in here?
By 10:15.
10:15. Okay, cool.
You got a half hour.
Perfect. And so this lot is in a really cool residential area, and it gets a lot of people checking it out. That's why we call it our flagship plot, because people walk by and they go, wow, this is really cool. I've never seen anything like this. And we found that the neighborhood has really embraced it. I put a lot of money into this plot, actually. This plot was builder's rubble, like just gravel and sand and rocks, basically. Soil wasn't contaminated, it was clean fill that was dumped in there. But I built a farm there. This plot here can generate about $30,000 a season. And so these are 50-foot beds. So there's 12 50-foot beds, and then this greenhouse has 6 36-foot beds, and this has 4 36-foot beds. And everything I do on my farm is called high rotation, that high rotation there. And I refer to that in my book. That means that every single bed on the farm will get rotated at least 4 times. So I also wrote in my book about another zone of production called birotation, where you have two rotations in a bed. But what I found is that the smaller you go, just the more rotations you should, just get rid of all the low rotation crops. And so that's why we've arrived at those kind of 3 categories of crops. I'm working on some new content too, where I'm discovering that I can get way more. I can actually get 6 rotations out of a bed that's not even in a greenhouse. I do that with a special tool called the paper plot transplanter. Many of you might have seen, we had a video that went viral, 60 million views of me using the paper plot transplanter. It's allowing us to transplant crops that normally wouldn't be transplanted. Because to go and transplant like really high density greens like this is a lot of labor. It's a lot of transplanting, and the cost kind of outweighs the benefits. But with the paper plot, what normally would take an hour or more to transplant a bed like this, I can transplant it in 4 to 5 minutes. And so I've got a little bit of material cost in there, about $8 in material cost, but it's negligible because each of these beds in a season generates at least $1,600 of revenue with 4 rotations. So if I can get that up to 6 rotations, that means that I can get that number close to $3,000 of revenue per bed in a season. But again, focusing on specific crops that are high value. So there's another high rotation plot. Backyard plot, 2,000 square feet, 11 50-foot beds here, and then 3 kind of otter-shaped beds, 30 feet to something like that. But this plot can generate $20,000 easily. Generally, at high rotation, your square footage is approximately times 10 for your production. If you're going, I use narrow walkways, like my walkways are 10 inches wide. Guys like Jean Martin on bigger farms do 18 inches. And when I build my bigger farm, it'll be 18 inches too. But in this high density context, it's about $10 a square foot of production. So 20,000 is totally reasonable. And if I extend the season here with caterpillar tunnels, mini greenhouses there, and paper plot transplanter, I can get this number to 30,000. It's all possible, and it's all possible here. Like price points are similar here. I've been all around the U.S. I see similar prices. There's some places that have lower, but Spokane is a relatively trendy city. I wouldn't be surprised if the price points for produce were very similar, if not on par with what I'm getting. Forget the fact that I'm charging Canadian dollars. It's pretty much the same in U.S. dollars here. This is the plot I'm going to show you that we converted. So near the end of this one, we'll look at some videos of how I converted this plot. So this plot went from a lawn that was all quack grass, or crabgrass, or twitch grass, whatever you want to call it, 48 days to making money. So crappy lawn to production, first harvest, we made $1,600 on the first harvest. That was harvesting these 4 beds of lettuce. We had 2 caterpillar tunnels on here, which are mobile greenhouses that cover 4 beds. So when we started this plot, this is the first block that we planted, 4 beds of lettuce. Those are transplanted, I believe, April 17. First harvest is a month later. And so we went from $1,600 on the first cut, so roughly 50 days from lawn to making money. Part of the reason that we can do that so well is, for one, we're focused on crops that grow fast. But another big part of it is the way we're growing the crops. So you'll see here, you can see this landscape fabric material in here. So this stuff wasn't planted with the paper plot transplanter. It was actually hand transplanted, which takes longer. But Because we're using this landscape fabric, we've got a 1.5 inch hole for each transplant. So the neat thing there is that I can do a bunch of prep, and a plot is going to be weedy when you first start, really weedy. But because I'm transplanting with these landscape fabrics, those weeds can come and those die off. So I can get production while I'm burning off the first crop of weeds in that top 2 inches of soil. Whereas normally you might use tarps and you might take a bit longer to get those weeds out of there. But we can work out the weeds while we're in production, which presents very exciting opportunities because you can get into a piece of land really quickly. Here's some of the tools I use. In the next workshop I'm going to go into these things in more detail, but there's 3 tools here that I wouldn't farm without. 2 in particular that you might not know about that are, these are seeders. I think people know what a seeder is. You can't farm commercially without a seeder. You have to have a seeder. I like the Jang seeder. That's my favorite one, the yellow one. But I would not grow greens commercially without this tool. It's called the Quick Cut Greens Harvester. It turns an hour into work in 4 minutes. It is a game changer if you're growing greens. And 50% of our crop allocation is greens, so I have 2 of them. This tool as well, you might not know what that is, but that's a flame weeder. And that is also a game-changing tool, because if you're farming organically, which we are, one of your biggest labor allocations will be on weeds. So we've eliminated weeding from our farm. We don't weed. We do preemptive work to get rid of the weeds before they become a problem. And we don't spend time pulling weeds. That's not a thing that happens on our farm. It's all done beforehand. Landscape fabric, tarps, flame weeders. If you're in the next workshop, we'll go into more detail about it. But this stuff eliminates weeding. So right off the bat, 50% of our labor allocation is gone. So that means we can spend time on other things, whether it's time with our kids or just doing other stuff. Most of our time on our farm is spent in post-harvest. It's actually 80%. 75 to 80% of our time on our farm is spent in post-harvest, meaning it's washing vegetables, packing things, delivering, distribution, customer management, marketing, all that kind of stuff. Only 20% is spent in the field. But that's because of the tools we use and the systems that we use to mitigate our work. Here's some of the hand tools we use: stirrapose, rakes. There's big plot transplanter. I'm not sure I have a video in this one, but in the next one I do. So this is what the basis of the production is: a 30-inch bed, 10-inch walkway. Again, your walkway width can vary depending on the size of your farm, also depending on what's comfortable for you. We're nimble young men. Well, I'm not so young anymore, but the guys that work for me are. And 10-inch walkways are fine, especially for the types of crops we're growing. If I was planting squash, like summer squash in these beds, that 10-inch walkway wouldn't work. The crop would exceed the walkway, and you'd lose the walkway, and you'd be always walking through crop, which isn't efficient. But for the types of crops we do, for the greens, the baby root vegetables, it's totally fine. It works. And that's the basis of the production. So everything in the market garden, as we know it, Jean-Martin Fortier, myself, Ben Hartman, Elliot Coleman, is based on a 30-inch bed. It's become the standard. So 30-inch bed, there's many things about it that make it great for farming. First is ergonomics. You can stand over the bed relatively easily with comfort. And you can also manage the bed in different ways. So you can kneel in one walkway, you can straddle it, you can put one knee down. There's different positions that you can be on there, which is it's a thing of ergonomics, it's a thing of sustainability for your body, because this type of farming is human intensive, right? It's human labor here for the most part. Technology is going to change that in 10 years. We might see more robotics doing some of this stuff, but we need to make it sustainable for us. And what I really try to teach people is that you can do this. You could be a couple. And one of my most common demographics of people that I've worked for over the years, or that I've seen in my workshops, are couples where one of the parents, they have kids, 2 or 3 kids, one of the parents is working full-time and then one of the parents is home. That parent at home starts the farm part-time. And then they're doing it on evenings and weekends, and then after a couple years of that, they transition, both parents are full-time on the farm. I've seen that literally dozens of times. In my book, I lay out a plan on how to do that, how to transition that, and I've seen it hundreds of times, and it's all based on what I've seen work. So you would be amazed on how many people have jobs they don't like, but live in a suburban home. They might get 2,000 square foot front yard, 3,000 square foot backyard. That's incredibly common in the US. The average home size or lot size in the US is 8,000 square feet. So that's combining the suburbia, urban areas, all that. It's different in high density urban areas. But most US homes have 8,000 square feet. So that in 8,000 square feet, if you got that much production, or it would be about 5,000 production, that means you could do about 50 grand if you're farming my way. So a suburban home, can you just think about the possibilities there. Think about the amount of people that would quit their shitty jobs that they don't like, that they're not happy with. They can be home with their kids. They can have a reasonable living, growing vegetables, doing something that they enjoy, that has intrinsic value in the community. Just think about the happiness factor. You know, forget the money part. Just think about how many people could be totally empowered to do that. And for me, as a family guy now, that is more important to me than ever, is to be home with my daughter. I don't want to be away all the time. And when I travel, I actually bring them with me most of the time, except on short trips. So just think about the possibilities there on the average lawn in the US. So here's how we do it. This is how we convert a lawn into a farm. So 48 days. So this is the site we're going to look at. And this is how we started. So this is March 31st. We put tarps on this site about about August the previous year. And they basically killed off most of the grass, not all of it. But if you're in a real rush, you could actually skip this step, and I'm going to show you how. But the basic idea there is we had the time. This is 2 blocks from our primary base of operations. People asked us. They said, "Hey, we got this plot." They came to us in the summer, and they said, "Do you want to use it?" I said, "Great. I'd love to get started. We'll put a tarp on it for now, because I'm not going to start developing it in the summer. But we'll leave that tarp on over the winter, and it'll kill off most of the grass. So we've got invasive weeds in here. We got bindweed. We got quackgrass, we got every other weed under the sun. And you got to be careful with some of those. And in more detailed conversations, I can certainly talk about how to manage those things specifically. But this is what we're starting with. This is 1,700 square feet. And I'm going to show you how in 5 days we had this in production, and then 43 days after that we got the first harvest. So March 31st, that's what we're doing. What I'm going to show you here is a 5-day turnover. So that was the first step, putting the tarps on. The next step shows you how you could actually skip the first step if you wanted to. You could go in right on lawn like my neighbors and go into the sod cutter and get it out. So we're still using the sod cutter here because we wanted to just get all the crowns from the quackgrass out primarily. That was our main concern. That's why we did the sod cutter. And it is easier to do the sod cutter if you killed it with the tarp a little bit. It goes a little bit faster, it's easier to remove the stuff. And so all we're doing there is sod cutting it and pulling that stuff out. We just take it to the local compost site. The dump in our city has a place to compost all the stuff, so we just take it there. If I had a bigger farm, I'd just compost it on site, but I don't. So I got to get rid of it. I have nowhere else to put it. It'd just be a big pile sitting there, and the neighbors would get mad at me. So that all happened on the first day. This is the first day as well. So after the sod is stripped off, then we're just going in and just tilling the hell out of it, basically. And people go, "Curtis, you're rototiller, you're killing earthworms, you're killing all the biology." Yeah, not really. A little bit. Think about it as taking drugs if you lose a limb. It hurts like hell, you give me the drugs, it helps. But it's not a long-term solution. Tilling isn't a long-term solution, but to break ground fast and get into production fast, it's a method that works. And what we're doing here is just grinding it up, and multiple passes, just to get a nice fluffy layer. It's hay oil gas. But multiple passes, up and down. I probably spent an hour and a half doing that. I'd go back and forth multiple times. I just want to grind it up. And from there, what I'm doing, right in this, it didn't happen in this little video, but what I'm doing now too is I'm taking my tiller and I'm forming out my bed. So in urban environments, you can do it by eye because it's short distances. But if you're doing this on a larger scale and you're doing 100-foot beds, we standardize the 50-foot beds. But if you're doing 100-foot beds in a rural area and you don't have like points like a neighbor's fence to follow or a house or whatever, you might use a string line to start to get your first rows. But what I'm doing right after this is just taking my tiller, walking next to it, and then just forming out my beds. So I'm just forming out the pattern of the beds. And so on this particular site, I can fit 11 beds. So you can kind of see them. There's a walkway there, there's a walkway there. So what we're doing here now is we're just bringing in a ton of organic matter. This stuff is compost that we made. So this is the next day. This is compost that we made over the years. It's actually mostly old microgreen flats. People always ask me, what do you do with the microgreen flats when they're harvested? Compost them, and they eventually make their way into the next site we're going to develop. So this site has a huge injection of organic matter. So this is mostly carbon-based peat with, you know, certain amounts of nitrogen from crop residue and all that in there, but it's mostly just carbon that we're putting in there. And so what happens after that is I till all that back in. So the idea here is that I want to physically change the composition of the soil. And that's what's great about tilling, especially at the start, is you can radically shift the composition of the soil quickly. You can bind organic matter to the soil composition, which changes its water retention, also can help you with drainage. So it changes its physical composition fast. After that, we're moving to no-till. Well, after we put in, so here I am tilling all that stuff in. So we've got it on beds, right? Now I'm going and I'm tilling it all in, so I'm changing that physical composition. But at this point, I'm only working on the beds. So we only put the organic matter on the beds. Because I'm not worried about the walkways, I'm not worried about the perimeter, those things aren't important. That's not where the production is. We're focused on making the beds where all the nutrients are, where all the organic matter is. The walkways are just static. So now I'm going up and down and I'm tilling it into the beds. So I'm still changing that physical composition of the soil. And so once I've done that, then we're going to come back with more compost, but now this is the good stuff. This is the $40 a yard, whatever you pay, sometimes $100 a yard. Even at those numbers, it's still economical. So we're dumping a lot of compost. What we're targeting here is 2 inches on the top layer of the soil of just good, really high quality aerobic finished compost, right on the top layer. So this is a day's work, spreading that out, and then the next thing we do. So this is a video from another plot, but I didn't have it for this plot. But this is exactly the same thing. We're raking it out on top of the beds. So we're just having that compost layer on the beds. And you could skip the next step. You could leave it there. You could stop there and just plant right into it. But what we do generally is we'll use a tool called a tilther, which I'll show you in a second. But I'm also adding a bit of a fertilizer there. That's a turkey manure. It's just a certified organic 444, I think, something like that. And then I use this little tool called a tilther that just turns it into the top layer. So I'm just kind of mixing it up in the top layer. So from this point on, after the initial prep, the farm is no-till. The only cultivation we're doing is in the top very inch of the soil. So we might continue to use that filter, but it's not technically till because we're not grinding up any subsoil. We're not bringing up old weed seeds. We're not putting down new weed seeds. We're breaking that cycle. That's one of the biggest advantages of no-till is you're breaking the weed cycle. So we're prepping the beds. So now they're fully prepped. They're done. Now what we do is I wet the beds down. Fortunately we had rain in the spring like you guys have here. Now I tarp it back up. Now I'm going to leave those tarps on for 2 weeks. A month is ideal. If you've got time for a month, that's certainly more ideal. But those tarps are just going to sit there. And what's happening here, this is called stale seed bedding. This is where we've done our bed prep, we've got our fertility in there. Now, what we're trying to do is encourage weed germination. So, weed germination in soil typically happens in the top profile. It happens in the top 2 inches. And these tarps are there to accelerate that weed germination. So, so the soil's wet, the black tarp on top is going to attract heat. So I'm going to accelerate the weed germination and I'm going to get a little carpet of weeds that just pop up. You pull these tarps off, you're going to see just carpet of weeds. So you can do 2 things there. You can do 3 things. You can either leave the tarp on for another 2 weeks and it'll probably smother the weeds out, depending on the temperature. If it's cold, it might take a bit longer. If you get some sunny days and it's warm, it can happen pretty quick. The other thing you can do is you can pull the tarp off right away and get a flame weeder in there, and that flame weeder just walks along the top surface and only boils the top millimeter of soil. It doesn't actually hurt the biology of the soil. Some people think it does, but Google the USDA studies. I think it was Pennsylvania State did a study on that. They found that there's no measurable biology damage in flame beating. Of course, if you held the flame meter there forever, of course it would. But a flame meter, you just walk across and it just boils the cells in those weeds. Then you could plant. Or the third thing you can do is what we did in this situation. So the tarp sat there for 2 weeks. And then in 2 weeks we pulled it off and we segmentized it. So this is the first succession. So we planted those 4 beds, and then we had the landscape fabric on there. So a big chunk of those beds are going to continue to stale seed bed, and then we've transplanted our crop into that. And because we're using a caterpillar tunnel, we're majorly expediting the date to maturity of that crop. And that's what the season extension stuff's all about. That's why, like, if you want to have a profitable farm, for the most part, in climates like ours, you need to use season extension. It's going to turn your days to maturity to something that's more predictable, in the sense that if you direct seed radishes in the field in April, they're going to take 45 to 50 days, depending on weather. If you direct seed radishes in the field in July, they're going to take 21 days. So the whole idea of using season extension is attracting more heat units on that soil in a shorter period of time to expedite that crop, to get you something that's more predictable. So we're using season extension on the shoulder seasons to get our crop days to maturity more like they are in the summer or close to it, so that we can have more rotations. And then we become more predictable. Do we have time for questions? All the time for questions, we can do that, right?
Yeah, 10 minutes.
Do we have a microphone for questions, or people can just blurt it out?
Right on the stage.
Okay. I'm almost done. Perfect timing. So we transplant in there, and so what happened on this plot in particular is we had 2 bi-weekly successions. So we had these 4 and those 4, and then these last 3 were done 2 weeks apart, and so we had a succession. So here's a month later, we're getting our first crop. And so now we've got 2 caterpillar tunnels on here. The first caterpillar tunnel is being harvested, and then we do cut and come again greens. So how this worked in succession, in detail, is that we had 4 beds that we harvested, or we had 4 beds. We harvested 2 1 week. We harvested the next 2 the next week. Then on the 3rd week, this one was ready to harvest. On the 4th week, these are ready to harvest, but then we've also got the regrowth on the first beds coming back. So we had probably almost 2 months of production of just continuous cycled harvests on this plot. And that's the idea, is staging the production. One thing that's really cool about using caterpillar tunnels is that they come up and down really easily. In my next workshop, I've got a video of us putting one up. They go up quick. Like, 1 or 2 people on my farm, these are 50-foot tunnels, can get this up in less than an hour. And it comes down in like 15 minutes. So the cool thing about that is you got optionality built into your farm, in the sense that I can now manipulate the growing conditions to give me the result that I want. So I can expedite the crop by putting the caterpillar tunnel on, get a shorter date of maturity, but I can also slow the crop down if I look at that and I go, oh, you know, this is growing too fast, I'm going to have too much in 2 or 3 weeks. I'm always thinking 3 weeks ahead of the farm. Look at production, I'm thinking, what's going to be this week, what's going to be next week, what's going to be week 3. Thinking ahead, and so I can take the caterpillar tunnel down and slow that crop down. So it's all about manipulating the growing cycles to give me a result that I want. So that's essentially it. That's how we do it. I've done this on 20 different plots over 8 years. I've done it on consulting for bigger farms. I've done it on my little farm. It's essentially the way to do it. There's little tweaks you can change here and there, but that's more or less it.